Emergency warnings for 2 bushfires raging in Western Australia.
But I knew something's happening when the helicopters come over, started sucking the water out of the lake. Yep, time to evacuate.
Restrictions return, tighter rules in South Australia and QR code check-ins back in New South Wales.
Global tributes for Desmond Tutu, the man remembered as South Africa's conscience.
Australia in a commanding position coming into day 2 of the Boxing Day test.
And the Sydney-Hobart yacht race drastically reduced after a tough night at sea. Good morning, it's Monday the 27th of December. I'm Dan Borscher.
And I'm Joanna Nicholson. You're watching News Breakfast. Firefighters in Western Australia are battling 2 blazes which are threatening lives and homes in Perth's east and in the southwest. Our reporter Jess Warriner joins us now from Perth. Good morning to you, Jess. What's the latest with the situation on the Warraloo fire?
Well, Jo, there has been some good news on that front overnight. So that fire about just under an hour east of Perth is now stationary. It's contained, but it's not controlled. So that emergency warning is still in place for parts of Warraloo, Chidlow and Gidgegannup. There's 250 firefighters on the scene there. And homes in Warrigal Estate are still under threat. For people inside there, it's actually too late to leave. There is an evacuation centre that's been set up in Mundaring. We had a chat to some of the people at that evacuation centre, and here's a bit of what they had to say.
When we were in the water, the announcement came over that we had to evacuate immediately. The fire was fast approaching.
Fortunately, didn't first sort of knew something's happening when the helicopters come over, started sucking the water out of the lake, and we said, oh geez, and then the speakers, the late caravan staff really good there and just called it out and said, yep, time to evacuate. The fire's coming and come out here and hang out here for a while. Yeah, it doesn't look good.
So that's the fire in Warraloo. What's going on in Margaret River?
So, yeah, that's right. We have 2 emergency level fires in WA at the moment. That emergency level is still in place for parts of Treaton and Osmington in the Augusta Margaret River Shire. It's a very difficult situation there because there's a lot of heavy fuels around, lots of bushland and things like that. Aerial support hasn't been able to operate overnight. That will be able to come back this morning if it's needed. An evacuation centre has been set up at Margaret River for that one. It's not contained or controlled.
So what's the outlook for today then?
A lot more hot weather on the way. Of course, around Perth we had a 42-degree day on Christmas, 43 on Boxing Day, and we're looking at temperatures of 40 degrees again today. Firefighters have been dealing with some really gusty winds overnight. The Bureau of Meteorology has been forecasting gusts of up to 70 kilometres an hour in the Perth Hills this morning. So between those gusty winds and the scorching temperatures, firefighters have a very busy day ahead of them.
All right, Jess Warriner there in Perth. Thank you.
Restrictions have been tightened in South Australia and mandatory check-ins are required once again in New South Wales as states deal with fast-growing COVID-19 outbreaks. New South Wales is leading the surge, recording more than 6,000 cases yesterday and a jump in hospitalisations to 458. That's 70 more people being treated in hospital than the day before.
COVID clinics were overwhelmed again yesterday, prompting the state government to call on people not to get a PCR test unless they're experiencing symptoms. And an investigation is underway after a Sydney pathology service incorrectly told 400 people they'd tested negative for COVID-19.
And reporter Sophie Wainwright joins us now from Sydney. Sophie, tell us more about that testing error.
Well, Sydney's St Vincent's Hospital emergency response team is investigating how its pathology service, SydPath, incorrectly informed more than 400 people that they had tested negative to COVID-19 when in fact they were positive. These swabs were conducted on December 22nd and 23rd at various clinics, including the very popular Bondi one, and these incorrect results were given to these affected people on Christmas night. The lab became informed of this mistake yesterday morning and has since been contacting the affected people. Some of those that we've been speaking to who have been caught up in this have expressed frustration and confusion since they had been displaying many of the symptoms. They're also demanding answers. The lab has apologised and has blamed this on human error as well as the sheer volume of tests that they've been having to process.
There's been massive strain on testing capacity in New South Wales recently. Sophie, is there any sign of that easing?
Well, it has actually eased over the Christmas weekend. Last week we were seeing 160,000 plus tests for a couple of days there, but in the latest reporting period that's decreased to just over 109,000 tests. In saying that though, authorities are still expecting test numbers to remain quite high given that we're heading into January, people have interstate holidays planned, so we should be expecting delays in getting tests and also getting those results as well.
And given that, lack of the testing yesterday, how are cases tracking?
Yes, despite the decrease in testing in the latest reporting period, the number of cases continues to rise. We saw a peak in New South Wales of 6,394. Hospitalisations are also increasing as well. Yesterday, the reporting period saw 458 hospitalisations, up from 388 the day before. Those in ICU, though, that remains steady at about 52.
And Sophie, some restrictions coming back today. Can you take us through them?
Yeah, that's right. Compulsory check-ins for lower risk settings such as retail and cafes were scrapped earlier this month, but that's being reinstated, though in a limited capacity. For example, if you're going to a major shopping centre, you won't be expected to check into each individual store you step into, rather just the main entrance. On top of that, we have a one person per 2 square metre rule instated for indoor hospitality settings, and both of these changes are expected to be in place for about a month.
Sophie Wainwright reporting there from Sydney.
Meanwhile, capacity limits and restrictions on gatherings are back in place in South Australia. Indoor hospitality has been reduced to 1 person per 4 square metres, while indoor gyms are only allowed 1 person per 7 square metres. The cap on household gatherings has been lowered now from 30 people to 10. South Australia recorded 774 COVID cases yesterday, and 17 people are in hospital with the virus.
Tributes are being paid to Archbishop Desmond Tutu, a veteran of South Africa's struggle against white minority rule. Mourners have gathered outside his former parish at St George's Cathedral in Cape Town, which used to be a safe haven for anti-apartheid activists. The Dalai Lama is one of many leaders who have acknowledged Tutu's passing, celebrating his dedication and their enduring friendship. In 1984, the cleric and activist was named a Nobel Peace Prize winner and for his non-violent opposition to the apartheid regime.
I share the immense sorrow that South Africans across our country and the world are feeling at the loss of this truly remarkable man. Our Arch, as we all know him, was a shining light for justice and compassion and kindness throughout our country and across the world.
I feel very, very, very down emotionally right now, because he was somebody that almost everybody liked, especially the kids. They love him.
We now that he's gone, I don't know, because the people like him with his beliefs, they are no longer there. So he was, like I said, he really was the last man standing.
Former US President Barack Obama called him a mentor, friend and moral compass for himself and many others. Echoing that statement, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle say Archbishop Tutu will be remembered for his optimism, moral clarity and joyful spirit. And Queen Elizabeth has also paid tribute, remembering their meetings and his great warmth with fondness.
The first case of the Omicron COVID variant has been detected in the Gaza Strip. The case is a resident who was infected within the coastal territory. Gaza is one of the world's most densely populated territories, with 2.2 million people. It's registered close to 190,000 COVID-19 cases and over 1,600 deaths.
Millions of people in the United Kingdom are now living under new social distancing restrictions after a week of record high COVID-19 cases. Residents were promised a normal Christmas with their families, but now Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales are limiting gatherings in hospitality and leisure venues. Nightclubs have also been closed and large events banned. No new measures are being enforced in England, despite it having the highest number of cases.
An armed man who entered the grounds of Britain's Windsor Castle on Christmas Day is being held by police under the Mental Health Act. Police say the 19-year-old from Southampton did not enter any buildings and security processes were triggered within moments. The Queen was celebrating there for Christmas with her close family, including son Prince Charles. The man has undergone a mental health assessment and remains in the care of doctors.
The James Webb Space Telescope has cleared another critical hurdle on its month-long journey into orbit. The observatory's trajectory has been adjusted in a course correction burn that lasted just over an hour. The spacecraft has already deployed and tested an antenna that will be responsible for sending data dumps to Earth.
And if you're not quite ready to let go of the Christmas spirit just yet, then this might put a smile on your face. A giant Santa made of sand and red roses has been relaxing on a beach in India, no doubt exhausted from his late night antics and his festive duties. The Santa is 50 metres long and 8 metres wide. It took days to complete, including a full 8 hours of sand carving. Relaxing after flying all around the world. He's a busy man, that Santa, and he deserves some R&R now, I think.
I reckon that costume would be getting a bit sweaty lying there on the beach, though.
Not very conducive to sunbathing.
What a labour. That's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's very impressive. Yeah.
Wonderful. Hey, let's get the latest on the Ashes with our sports reporter Tom Maddox down at the MCG. Tom, take us through the highlights from yesterday.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Joe. The sun is just poking through the clouds here at the MCG. I think we're expecting a top of 23, so good conditions for cricket. 57,000 fans came through the MCG yesterday, so we're expecting some decent crowds again today. Late last night, the English did get some joy. They took the wicket of David Warner, the Australian opener, after he made a pretty quick-fire 38. Jimmy Anderson took that wicket, and it left the Australians at the end of day one on 1 for 61, with Marcus Harris at the crease on 20 not out. At the other end is the night watchman Australia sent in Nathan Lyon. He's on no score. But the start of the day was not a good one for the tourists. Australian captain Pat Cummins decided to bowl when he won the toss. The conditions seemed to favour the bowlers, and indeed they did. Pat Cummins, opening the bowling, took a wicket in his first over. He went on to take 3 wickets in a superb bowling display, really leading from the front. Nathan Lyon also took 3 wickets, and really the English batsmen made some poor choices. There was some soft dismissals. After the match, Johnny Bairstow admitted to the press that they just can't go out cheaply like that in the future. They were all out for 185. Joe Root, the English captain, unsurprisingly, was really the only resistance during the day. He made 50 and then went out. But it was a good day for the Australians, a dominant day and a disappointing one for the English. The other storyline was, of course, the debutant Scott Boland, the Victorian. He took a wicket and also took a couple of catches. The crowd here at the MCG really loved their local man in Scott Boland on debut. A memorable day for Scott Boland. But today, really, the Australians will look to put the English to the sword. They'll look to make a big total here, upwards of 400, and then really look to take a 3-0 lead, because that's, of course, where we're at. 2-0, they're up. It's really a make or break day for the English. That goes without saying, Dan.
And Tom, what can we expect today?
Yeah, as I was saying, it's really about Australia building a healthy lead. They're 1 for 60 odd, only trailed by 124 runs or so. Marcus Harris is at the crease, he's 20 not out, so this is a huge opportunity for him to cement his spot in the Australian Test side after making not many runs, but the selectors have given him the chance to bat throughout this series. And then Steve Smith, Marnus Labuschagne. There's a lot of batting depth to come for the Australians. Labuschagne, of course, has just become the #1 Test batsman in the world. He'll look to continue his incredible form, and Steve Smith, I'm sure, will try and cash in and make a big score. So the English really need early wickets in this first session, Dan.
Yeah, Tom Maddox reporting there from Melbourne.
It's great to have your company this Monday on News Breakfast. Still to come this hour, this Christmas Boxing Day long weekend, we're talking the two things that people often do, Boxing Day sales and also heading off to the movies. We'll have Paul Zara later on, where he's from the Australian Retailers Association, talking to us about how Australians are still spending big on the sales despite the Omicron doom and gloom, whether they're heading off to the shops in person, fewer numbers in person, but, you know, there's huge sales still online, of course.
Yeah, and we'll chat with Giles Hardy about the blockbusters hitting theatres, including the new film in the Ghostbusters franchise and the first new Matrix film in 18 years.
Yes, I'm keen to get Giles's thoughts on the big Boxing Day releases, but we're also going to get his thoughts on what his favourite movie of 2021 has been. So there's a lot to choose from, and also looking ahead to, you know, the awards season and that sort of thing. Who he's keeping an eye on. So we'll be joined by Giles a bit later on. Let's check the weather in the capitals first. For Brisbane, there'll be some showers there, a shower or two also in Sydney. A cloudy day in Canberra, partly cloudy in Melbourne, but becoming windy there. Cloudy also in Hobart, but sunny in Adelaide. Very hot and partly cloudy in Perth, and rain and a storm likely in Darwin.
It's been a tough night at sea for crews in the Sydney to Hobart yacht race. The fleet has now been drastically reduced.
The race returned this year after a forced cancellation in 2020, but COVID-19 continues to have an impact. Our reporter Liz Gwynn joins us now. Liz, good morning to you from a beautiful Constitution dock there in Hobart. Who's currently leading the race?
Hi, Joanna. It certainly is beautiful out here today. So Blackjack currently remains in the lead, and it's basically leading by about 6 nautical miles in front of Law Connect, and we do have Scallywag, which is up behind in third position. There's not a lot of distance between these Supermaxis at the moment, so it certainly is an exciting race. Now, we have seen in the past 18 hours some really tough conditions for the crews out there today. They've had thunderstorms, they've had strong winds up to 30 knots an hour at times, and they've also have waves that have peaked at about 2.5 metres. So it really is a race and a survival of the fittest at the moment, Joanna.
Liz, have we seen many retirements, and what's happened there?
We have, so about half an hour, 45 minutes ago, we got the news that Ecstasy was forced to retire simply due to engine issues. Now, the race started with about 88 boats. That's now down to 66, so it's been drastically reduced. It just goes to show the tough conditions that they're facing at the moment. Now, some of the reason for the retirements is a broken head stay. We had No Limit that had to retire due to a crew member dislocating their shoulder. Philosopher also retired due to internal damage to bunk beds. So a really tough 18 hours, and no doubt will continue to be quite tough, Joanna.
Of course, the race last year had to be cancelled because of COVID. It's still having an impact this year, though.
It is, unfortunately. We saw 2 boats and yachts that had to withdraw from the race just because of COVID-19. So that was Willow. There were a couple of cases detected on board, but Maverick 49 decided to pull the pin, not because of any cases, but because the owner simply wasn't willing to take the risk. So it has had an impact. It could continue to still have an impact. Event organisers have told us that if there are any cases that are detected on board, then those yachts will be forced to retire immediately. But it won't dampen any of the celebrations when those boats do arrive here in Hobart. We aren't expecting any race records to be set, but there'll be a lot of welcoming and open arms and celebrations for those yachts when they do get here.
Yes, no doubt. We love seeing it. All right, Liz Gwynn there in Hobart. Thank you.
For more on the race, the Commodore of the Cruising Yacht Club of Australia, Noel Cornish, joins me now. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you, Dan.
How's it all looking this morning?
Well, it's all pretty brutal out there. It's a 30-knot southerly, which is not all that unusual for this sort of race, but there's a current going from north to south against that wind, and it's standing the seas up. So we've got pretty brutal seaway conditions out there, which is what's causing a lot of the damage. The main issue for yachts is torn mainsail, and then there's other issues like forestay or problems with some minor injuries. But really it's just hard conditions on the cruise. They've got a little way to go before this southerly front has passed through, but yeah, they know they're blue water racing at the moment.
Yeah, well, I think when you say that it was brutal, you put it perfectly, because it sounds like it's incredibly intense out there. Have you seen it like this in recent years, notwithstanding not the years where it hasn't happened, obviously?
Yeah, no, look, this southerly is not unusual. I've been out there in 50 knots of breeze myself, but it's really this seaway that's causing the damage to the yachts at the moment. And so, you know, we're just hoping that they can hunker down in, and we've still got 67 boats in the race, and they'll come through it. And then, unfortunately, they're going to get into some very difficult weather pattern transitions, and there'll be periods of no wind coming up shortly, which is a bit ironic in the circumstances.
It sounds like a feast or a famine in this Sydney to Hobart.
Yep, that's very much the case. It's a navigator's challenge in the next day or so.
And what do you make of those that are out in front and their performance so far?
They're going really well. So the first boat to enter into Bass Strait, we have a sked that people call in at Green Cape, which is really the entrance to Bass Strait and for us. And the first boat that went through there was Law Connect this morning. But, you know, Law Connect, the other Super Maxis, they're all changing positions and jostling positions all the time. It's a very competitive race. And it's the same for the handicap honours. Those positions are moving around all the time. So, yeah, very exciting race to watch going forward from here.
It's also been a really interesting year because you've brought in a new group, and that's boats that have only got 2 people on them.
Yeah, no, it's a challenge for those guys. So, yes, two-handed racing had become very popular in Europe, particularly in England and France, and there was some conversation about a two-handed event in the 2024 Paris Olympics. So we embrace two-handed racing at our club. We've got a division now. You know, it started off with 18 boats in the division racing to Hobart, so very, very popular. There's still 16 of those yachts out there with 2 people on them, and it'll be tough going for them. They won't be getting much sleep at the moment, but they're tough competitors, and they're going to really show us what two-handed racing can be in this Sydney Hobart race.
Yeah, do you know where they're faring in the broader group? Are they up near the front or closer to the back?
Well, they tend to be the smaller boats. They're like in the 30 to 35 foot range. So they're towards the back of the fleet, middle to the back of the fleet. But they're very capable sailors. I know a number of the people that are in those two-handed groups, and they're really, really knowledgeable, know what they're doing, and they'll be competitive. But they're not up near where the Super Maxis are or the TPs, because just the nature of the size of their boats.
And of course, you've had a couple of your teams that have been touched by COVID-19. Just how much of a consideration has that had to have been for you in planning the logistics of this Sydney to Hobart?
It's been all-consuming, really, for about the last 8 months, which is when we start the run into preparing for this race. We've been in negotiations with the New South Wales and Tasmanian governments to try and find ways to make the race go ahead. We've had tremendous cooperation. The crews have had to have their own COVID-safe plans. We've got our plan at the club, which is, as managing risk for COVID as absolutely best we can. But still, there's been all these challenges thrown at us, and this latest derivative of the virus has added another new dimension. And yeah, as you say, sadly, we had a couple of yachts drop out, very, very late in the piece, simply because they had positive people on board and they just couldn't head down south as a result.
Yeah, well, we certainly are glad that you've been able to persevere, and we'll be watching with keen eyes. Noel Cornish, the Commodore of the Cruising Yacht Club of Australia. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Much appreciated.
All-consuming. I think that's very relatable when it comes to COVID. At least the race has been able to go ahead this year, unlike last year it had to be cancelled. So we're looking forward to some of those nice scenes that we usually see at Constitution Dock in Hobart, when all the boats start to come in and the crowds gather, and it's always such a great atmosphere.
It is, isn't it?
So.
And it's, we love watching on wherever people are in Australia. There's that point of commonality, which is so often the case with sport. But that description there about being brutal out there, it sounds intense, doesn't it?
Yeah, and no race records expected this year because of, that wild weather and things. But it'll still be great scenes when it happens.
Indeed. Well, figures show Christmas spending is up this year despite the rising COVID-19 cases.
For more, we're joined by Australian Retailers Association Chief Executive Paul Zahra. Paul, good morning to you. And now, despite the rising COVID cases, people are still really spending up big over Christmas and Boxing Day. How have the Boxing Day sales gone so far?
Well, look, there were certainly fewer people than expected when we started the sales off at around 7 a.m. yesterday morning. But what we did see was that the traffic and the crowds did build as the day went on. So that's music to the ears for retailers, because they wanted it to be certainly a controlled environment. And people were generally well behaved, wearing masks, social distancing. And, it was just an all-out good day. I think most of the retailers I spoke to this morning said their sales actually met expectation. And we're seeing what we do forecasting is that Australians will spend about $21.1 billion over this Boxing Day sales. That's 2.1% up on last year. Now, last year was a heightened level of spending because of the government stimulus, and it'll be about 12.6% up on pre-pandemic levels. So, there's certainly pent-up demand and people are excited to be out and shopping. And, Omicron certainly made everybody a little bit more cautious, but people have behaved well and have shopped, with purpose. Not little browsing we saw yesterday was mainly they knew what they wanted, they got the item that they needed and left. And online was very popular, obviously, yesterday because there were many people that chose to shop from the comfort of their own home. Yeah,
I was going to say, it's not just the physical foot traffic that you'll be watching, but also that online. How crucial is that online presence, particularly at a time like this?
Well, look, I think many retailers about a decade ago saw online as being an absolute disruptor to their business. Now they see it as a true insurance plan, because without an online offering, they certainly couldn't roll with the punches through the COVID threat. So it's been a real lifesaver for businesses, particularly small businesses, of course, who've been decimated through the COVID period. So, we're at least pleased that people do have an option to shop in a very safe and contactless way.
I've noticed, Paul, as well over the last few years that with those sort of event day shopping times, Boxing Day or Cyber Monday, they often kick off a couple of days early, which I guess on one hand means that people have a longer period to take advantage of the sales, but then on the other hand, it removes that kind of event sort of sense of the day.
Well, look, it's a very competitive market. So you see some retailers go ahead of the others just to sort of get people on the post. But the big event is always the day of the official starting line. And that's what we see. But we do see some retailers start earlier, and that's become part of, as I said, a very competitive situation. Retailers want to be ahead of their competitor.
Now, Paul, we have got more COVID-safe measures coming into place, already in place in various parts of the country. Check-ins, for example, in New South Wales are coming back in. They're a bit different. So when you go into a shopping centre, you have to check in, not necessarily for each individual store. There are masks back. How are retailers managing all of these different restrictions?
Well, look, the retailers from the onset have actually followed the health expert advice and have actually done their absolute best to make sure that those regulations are well communicated to their consumers. And I've got to say that both the QR code and the mask wearing is now really well socialised in each state, particularly in New South Wales. So we didn't see any issues yesterday. We certainly don't expect any issues. In fact, the QR code being done at the shopping centre entrance will make a significant difference to the shopping experience. So if that's what the health experts have asked for, we welcomed it because it'll be easier for shoppers rather than having to check into every single store.
The other big issue for retailers has been when their staff members are exposed to COVID-19 and then have to isolate until they get a negative test or isolate for a particular period of time. Are people really dealing with the low staffing during this particularly busy time?
Look, it's definitely been a massive issue for retailers, but it's coupled with the fact with international borders being up that we've had significant staff shortages to deal with because we normally rely on international students to fill a lot of the job vacancies that just simply were left unfilled through this period. Now, for discretionary retailers, this is up to 2/3 of their profits is made through Christmas and the Boxing Day sales. So it's really important that they're staffed well and do well. But you would notice when you're shopping, the staffing levels, the service levels are not at what they were last year. So that's impacted retailers. And of course, with the Omicron and close contact situation, that's meant in some cases, retailers, particularly in hospitality, which were significantly impacted, have not been able to trade. And look, I've got to say they're a resilient group and we've rolled with the punches as the issues have come to hand.
Yeah, they are a resilient group and they've been copping it sometimes. Have you been hearing reports of retailers having to deal with frustrated and angry customers and taking it out on them?
Look, this was a massive issue, particularly in Victoria, due to the vaccination checks coming in a little later. We had a bit of a stop-start scenario there. The vaccination checks seem to have been the most contentious issue. We don't have those in place in the bigger states, and I think that's reduced the anxiety specifically around those checks. But it's an issue for the industry, and unfortunately, it's a new skill set that frontline staff have had to be taught because simply because of COVID and simply because people are going about their day in a very anxious way. We've had significant supply shortages as well due to the pandemic, which has caused a lot of the anxiety, and that's actually played out in aggression as well. Now, in saying that, Boxing Day, we've had no significant reports, so it looks like to me that those issues hopefully are behind us.
And just finally, Paul, as we look into 2022, another year, what are you going to be looking out for in 2022 and hoping that it brings?
Well, we hope for no more lockdowns. I think we can deal with QR codes, mask wearing and any other regulation. Lockdowns have decimated businesses and we certainly don't want that to happen. We have a fairly bright outlook for 2022 from a retail trade point of view. There's about $240 billion in household savings. There's about $60 billion that Australians would normally spend overseas on travel. There's $300 billion there that will be spent locally. Now that's music to the ears for retailers, but equally great for the Australian economic recovery. So we, all in all, if there's no lockdowns, we think that the industry will revive itself and survive through this very difficult period.
All right, Paul Zahra, the Chief Executive of the Australian Retailers Association, thanks very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
A look at the satellite. Thick cloud with a monsoon trough is bringing heavy rain and storms to the top end of Australia. A broad trough is pushing heat into WA. Cloud with a trough over Queensland, New South Wales and parts of WA is triggering showers and storms, and high pressure is maintaining clear skies in South Australia and Victoria. Let's take a look around the country now. Warm temperatures across Queensland with isolated showers in the east. Showers expected in parts of New South Wales and cloudy with a slight chance of showers in the ACT. In Victoria, a mostly sunny and warm day in the north with windy and cool conditions in the south. Mostly sunny in Tasmania with cloud coverage in the southwest. Windy with mild to warm temperatures across South Australia. Another very hot day right across Western Australia with showers easing in the northwest. And for the Northern Territory, showers and storms in the north and mostly sunny day elsewhere. Looking ahead now to tomorrow's forecast for the capital cities. In Brisbane, partly cloudy with a high chance of showers there. The chance of showers in Sydney, cloudy with a slight chance of showers in Canberra. Mostly sunny in the afternoon for Melbourne. Cloudy in Hobart, mostly sunny in Adelaide, getting up to 39 degrees in Perth and a high chance of rain for Darwin.
The top stories on ABC News. Emergency warnings have been issued for 2 bushfires in Western Australia. A fire in Wooroloo, east of Perth, is a direct threat to lives and homes. Officials say it's too late to leave for people in Warragul Estate. Others outside the estate are advised to leave if the way is clear. Another fire in Margaret River in the state's southwest is posing a threat to lives and homes at Treaton and Osmington. The fire is escalating quickly, but people are advised to leave if they can.
New restrictions on home gatherings, hospitality venues and gyms have come into place in South Australia, with capacity limits at gyms, cafes and restaurants reduced. Caps on home gatherings have also dropped from 30 down to 10 ahead of New Year's. And meanwhile, in New South Wales, QR code check-ins are once again mandatory at cafes and shopping centres, while indoor mask wearing has been compulsory since Friday.
Anti-apartheid icon Archbishop Desmond Tutu has been memorialised by world leaders and religious figures. The Nobel Peace Prize laureate has been described as a true humanitarian by the Dalai Lama, while former US President Barack Obama remembered him as a mentor, friend and moral compass.
And Australia will resume at 1 for 61 on day 2 of the Boxing Day test after opener David Warner was dismissed late in the last session. The tourists were all out for just 185 in their first innings after Australia won the toss and sent them into bat. England's Johnny Bairstow made 35 from 75 balls and says the side gave up their wickets too easily despite the conditions favouring the bowlers.
A new program aims to boost the participation of remote Indigenous students in tertiary education by allowing for both learning on campus and out on country.
The program has taken its first cohort, a group of students from East Arnhem Land, who have become the first in their remote community to graduate with university entry-level scores.
Kenesha Winninguj is a long way from home, but she's looking forward to 2022 when she'll be entering her first year of university in Darwin.
I'm excited and a little bit nervous.
Last year, she was among a group of students from Yirrkala in East Arnhem Land who became the first in their remote community to graduate Year 12 with a tertiary admission score. Now, Kenesha and 5 of those students have taken part in a pilot program at CDU, which aims to help them in their transition to university.
It's helping them transition to this completely new space that they find themselves in, not only in Darwin, away from community, but also in this place where they have to deal with academic culture.
While starting university can be a stressful time for any new high school graduate, these students face additional hurdles. English is not their first language, and there are also difficulties in adjusting to life away from home.
Being away from a place where they live close to family and close to culture it's a big shift for them. And then there's, of course, the whole business of reading and writing academic text.
The program, which was run in partnership with the Yirrkala-based group, the Jalkari Foundation, allowed the students to study both on-country as well as on campus in Darwin.
Assessment writing, research, if they had to do Harvard, referencing, that sort of stuff, that is often things that we're not exposed to in remote communities.
A federal government review in 2019 found people in remote locations were less than half as likely to get a university degree compared to their city counterparts, with the divide even more stark when looking into the participation rates for Indigenous students. It's hoped this pilot program will help provide a model for future transition programs to help boost the enrolment and success of Indigenous students. Students who took part in the program are going into fields including law and education. Kenesha plans to become a midwife.
I'd like to go back home and work with young mothers, help them with their babies and be happy.
The university says it hopes to continue the program next year and help young leaders walk with a foot in 2 worlds. Husni Shams, ABC News, Darwin.